Well, Anabelle, thank you so much for joining me. And I didn't actually mention this just before we were talking. This is the first in-person podcast I've done in, oh my God, so long. All of them have been done via Zoom. But again, I was like, when I messaged you, I said, do you want to do it via Zoom? Do you want to do it in person? I'm so thankful you actually did it in person because just craving that in-person interview rather than looking at a screen. And how's life been for you going through the turbulent world that we're living in through COVID? What's been going on in your world?
Well, firstly, thanks for having me. I'm also glad to do it in person because I've done a lot of things on my laptop and my eyes are turning square. So
yeah,
it's been a very challenging year for everyone, obviously. But for me, my goal was obviously Tokyo 2020 this year, and to have that sort of pulled from underneath me at the last sort of minute, and just to have so much uncertainty that I've never faced this much uncertainty in my career. And as an elite athlete, I crave consistency and routine, and I really just had to let go of all of that control just because, this is all out of our hands. So it's been difficult, but at the start was the hardest. And then I've slowly come to terms with everything, and I've got a great support team around me who have helped me work through things as well. And now, thankfully, in Australia, the virus is getting a little bit better. And so I'm able to come over here and get back to training and get back to some sort of normality.
Yeah. I mean, look at everyone, they're just walking around, and it's just got, where I'm from, England, it's got so much worse recently. And you almost look around now, you wouldn't really know. So you've been relocated here for a little bit. How long are you here for in Adelaide?
I'm in Adelaide indefinitely. So
oh wow.
Yeah, I'm from Melbourne, but have had to train all around Australia for various reasons. But went back home at the start of the virus, so kind of had very interrupted training for about 5 months, and then we finally got permits to come over to Adelaide, where it was very odd for me to come and see people living normally because Melbourne's had it pretty rough for the past few months and wearing masks, and we couldn't really leave home. And here it's very nice because everyone seems to be going about their business as normal.
How did you I haven't had to put a mask on the entire time I've been here. South Australia has been amazing. Like really, really has. We dealt with it. I think as a nation, Australia has dealt with the virus really well.
Yeah.
I think they've done an amazing job. Has it affected you? First off, athletes crave that structure, that training, and that routine. That must have been ripped away from you and being told to stay inside. How did you deal with that mentally?
It was very difficult. I'm a very energetic kind of person, and also the first half of my year is always competitions overseas, so I'm not really in one spot for very long, which I quite enjoy because it keeps me on my toes, and I put in all that work for training for the 6 months at the end of the year, and then our comps start in February. So I was ready to go. I'd actually just come back from we managed to get one World Series event out of the way in Canada. And as we flew home, it was when it was all kicking off. And then within a couple of weeks, everything was shut down. So, being stuck. I think at the very beginning, I was just confused what was going on, and no one really knew what to expect or how fast or how long this would go for. Obviously, the Olympics weren't postponed till like a month or so later. So we kind of were just still thinking we would still go to the Olympics. But then when, it all kind of hit home that this year was going to be a write-off, it took me probably a couple of weeks to sort of sit in a bit of disappointment. And, I've at the back end of my career, so I wasn't sure what I was going to do after Tokyo. I was sure I was going to go on a long holiday and just switch off for a while, but I wasn't sure if I was going to retire or keep going. So to sort of like have to reevaluate everything, and it was a bit of a challenge, but thankfully, a couple of weeks later, I started to reset my goals.
So what did you do with your time? Were there other divers, athletes that you have in Melbourne? Melbourne's a hub of sport for not only Australia but the world. Yeah. Were there other athletes? And I said this in a previous podcast that I think one of the blessings is that everyone's in the same boat. Yeah. So I think there's a part of you as an athlete that will chip away and go, oh my God, someone's now being able to pull away from me.
Yeah.
And whereas reality is this is happening to everyone.
Yeah.
You're not going anywhere. They're not going anywhere.
Yeah. It was strange because every athlete was in the same boat. It it was only Australia or it was only Canada or whoever. But at the start, our Institute of Sport in Victoria sort of handed out a lot of gym equipment so that we could set up some things at home. I live in an apartment with my brother, so didn't have a lot of space, but got some weights and made it work. But it was difficult to structure my day without leaving my house or without, at my home is where I rest and I recover, and to have to turn that now into my gym space, my workspace, my everything space was not that much fun at the start, but you had to get used to it pretty quickly.
Yeah, that's actually something that I think I struggled with and I crave now. And I think, again, blessed that we're living in our own bubble in Australia, that I can go and work out, run around, and obviously the scenery is unreal, and that's been something that's been so good, not only for my physical health but mental health as well. You're right, it's when you're training, it's great to have that compartmentalization of where you go to the gym, I train there, I go home, I rest
100%,
and I don't want to be bringing my workouts into my bedroom where I'm sleeping, which is then making my brain confused and making me think I should be doing a workout in my bedroom. So that's a real interesting area of it, isn't it?
Yeah, and I think also, like, for me, when I go to train, or like when I rock up at the gym, I'm there to train and I'm ready to go. And that changing that to my lounge room or my living room was difficult. But after a couple of weeks, it kind of became a bit of a novelty, and I was trying out different workouts and doing YouTube, like just random. My training is usually very much the same. I know what I'm doing when I rock up to the pool or I rock up to the gym, but having a little bit more variety was fun. But then when we kind of got a taste of going back to training, when the first wave sort of settled down, and then being kicked out again the second time was not a novelty, and that was the real struggle, I think.
Yeah, no, I honestly, you can only empathise with people that what was going on in Victoria, and you can only empathise with what's going on with people in the world, and the UK going into a lockdown. I just can't imagine what it's going to be like, and the mental health crisis that's going to happen, not only over the coming months or like in days, but like the months following that, and just feel it instantly. I got my housemates here, and they were like, we were only kind of locked down for maybe 10 to 14 days before the plan was set in, and straight away, bang, you're aggravated, like you're just agitated I can't have friends around, what's going on?
You're just in your own head 24/7, so it's hard when you don't have distractions or your usual things to switch off. So
it's nice you're saying about that you get a chance to try out different workouts, because as an athlete you have like a regimented strength and conditioning program, and it's very, very to the letter, and go do a Joe Wicks workout on YouTube, like why not, go give it a go. I just have to be worried now. I'm just scared I'm going to hurt myself if I do anything outside of my usual training regime. I am scared I'm going to hurt myself, but thankfully I didn't, so that was good. Because you're so conditioned to just one form moving. So how did you get into diving? How did that journey begin for you? So I grew up a very sporty kid. I played every sport under the sun. I think I had so much energy that my parents just put me in anything. But my main sort of interests were I did little athletics, played netball, and played soccer. So 3 very normal sports, but always sort of had an acrobatic natural ability, had aerial awareness. We had a backyard trampoline, and I spent hours just bouncing on my tramp outside and teaching myself flips and, just kind of like self-taught sort of things, but never did gymnastics, which a lot of divers these days come from gym. But when I was about 12 years old, my cousin was doing diving at the time, and I don't really remember really knowing what diving was when I was little, but there was a pool near where I grew up that had a diving board, and so I tried out in a holiday program, thought it was super fun, different, challenging. The coaches saw that I had some natural ability and asked me to join up just in their term program, so added one diving session a week on top of my other sports, and then progressed pretty quickly. And a couple of years later, a high performance program for juniors started in Melbourne for the first time ever, and Diving Australia brought over a Chinese coach, and China's the top of the diving game, so that was all very exciting. And I got selected for that group, and my one session and other sports turned into give everything up and do 10 sessions of diving from when I was 14 years old. So I was going to say that I was going to have an inkling that there was either going to be a trampoline involved in this story, or there was going to be gymnastics somewhere. So you got the trampoline, you got half of it. When you go from that period of it being self-taught, a bit of fun, where's that line for you where it was like, okay, Annabelle, I can actually do something with this?
Yeah, interesting. Well, I was super competitive in everything that I did when I was young. I was in the academy for soccer. I was, states and nationals for little athletics. So
what age are we talking here? What age?
oh, when I was like 11, 12, 13.
Right, yeah, okay.
So I was pretty young.
Yeah, wow.
But when I got into this junior high performance program for diving, and I did that 10 sessions a week, and I made my first World Junior Championships within a year after that. So because I was progressing and it was fun and things just came really easily to me when I was younger, that's sort of when, as a kid, I always dreamed of going to the Olympics. But I think lots of kids do, and your parents just like, oh yeah, one day. But I don't think anyone realized it was actually going to happen. So probably around 15, it was when I'm like, okay, so this could happen, and I've got to take this seriously. And thankful for my family for sacrificing so much for me to be able to do my sport and send me around the world before I was funded. And I guess just opportunity presented itself, and I sort of took every opportunity that I could and was lucky enough to progress pretty quickly.
So it's been more of a natural progression rather than actually set out, I've just seemed to have slipped into this really seamlessly.
Yeah, and I enjoyed it. So it didn't, training before school and after school, it wasn't, when I was younger, it wasn't something that I thought twice about. It was just what I did. I loved it. It was my routine. So, yeah.
Is it highly competitive in sort of the depth of the amount of people that are doing it? Because obviously over here, cricket, AFL, bit more football, soccer, whichever way you want to talk about it. Those are the staples, almost a bit of NRL, like rugby, and what's sort of like the depth of diving in?
Diving's
weird analogy, a bit of a pun there, really.
Diving's it is a pretty small sport, but in Melbourne when I grew up, there was 8 kids who made this junior high performance program, and everyone was super talented, and we were all really great friends. So I think that also helped. The hard parts of training, and you just got to share it with your friends. So we had a lot of depth in Melbourne back in my era, but around like in Adelaide, diving's not that big.
It's so interesting how you call it your era.
Yeah. Back in the day.
Yeah. How quick are these eras? They sound like very quick eras.
No, but generally it's pretty small. And like you see, there's at our national championship, there's not even close to the same amount of people in our grandstand as there is at like a club swimming competition. So it's not very big, but it also means that the diving community is pretty tight-knit and very supportive. So that's a good thing, I guess.
Can you remember the first time you stood on board?
I can remember the first time I stood on the 10-meter platform, the tallest one. As a kid, I had not much fear, so it wasn't that scary. I thought it was pretty cool, jumped off. It was, a bit of an adrenaline rush, but as I progressed and started learning dives off 10 meter and the harder dives, and I'm all of a sudden spinning 3.5 times holding my legs, then that's when it gets a little bit scary. But I only do 3-meter springboard now, so if I go back up to 10 meter now, it's scary. And I think
really,
the older you get, the wiser you get. So you just come down to the 3 meter.
So this is where I really want to. I mean, God, there's so many areas I want to go to, but you first off actually mentioned about you had a Chinese coach come over, and a previous guest on the podcast was a guy called Richard Hussein. He was a strength and conditioning coach in the UK, but he'd actually worked with Team China in diving. And one thing he really spoke about, which was how he spoke about how the athletes applauded when an athlete got a dive wrong.
Oh, when they got it
wrong. When they got it wrong.
Right.
Really, really interesting.
In China?
So I had to double check he got that right. And he said, no, when they get it wrong, they applaud them. They have everyone around them, because the theory was that they are better off praising that person going for something they've never done before than knocking them down, having gone for it and failed.
No, that's...
What an amazing... I thought it was really, really interesting. Again, I had to double check, you get that right? You praise them for getting it wrong. Yeah, no.
Yeah, no, it is like that though, because in diving, obviously, when you're learning harder skills, it is scary. It is kind of dangerous, but when someone attempts something, even if it doesn't go perfectly right the first time, everyone generally does get around you, because you're doing something different, you're doing something new, and it takes courage to do that, I think. So it's pretty supportive.
So where I was going with this was that first time you're on the 10-meter platform, or even on the 3-meter springboard, like, and you know you're about to do something that you've never done before, where's your mind at with that? Where's the training come from? Has there been a period of on land diving and flipping? Because again, you said trampoline. I've seen some stuff that you've been doing on your Instagram. You're in basically a gym, like a gymnasium, and you're doing a lot of stuff that's around where gymnastics would be. Yeah. So is that the progression from there into the pool?
Everything in diving is progression. And so if I took a kid who'd, never done diving ever, they'd start very, very slow. So
you'll tip them into the pool.
Yeah.
It's pretty much about where I'm at.
Yeah. But when you're young, I think for me, it was all about just like building that trust in my coach, because if you have a good coach, they're never going to make you do something that you're not ready to do. So anytime I learned a new dive, and I remember the day I first did a hard dive, which we call an optional dive on 10 meter, which was a forward 3.5 somersaults pike, my first big kid dive. And I remember just waking up one morning and I'd done all the build-ups on the 5 meter platform. I was ready to do it. It was just sort of like finding that courage to finally go. Yeah. And I remember the day I woke up and I just like something came over me and I was like, I'm ready to do it. I'm ready to go up to 10 meter. Told my coach that afternoon. He's like, right, you're ready. There's like a bubble machine that is big jet, springs water up from the bottom of the pool if you're learning a new dive. And so had the bubbles. The surface was nice and soft. Did the dive, landed on pretty vertical, and it was fine. So I think for me, I definitely drew off my coach. He'd been like preparing me and telling me that I'm ready. All my build-ups were great. And then it just took me to buy into that and understand, okay, I feel ready as well. And then off I went. So,
if you're getting that confidence from someone else, that's a massive, massive boost. The bubbles that you're talking about that are coming up from underneath, those in competition as well? They're on...
No. Just when people are learning new dives.
So that's another fear factor as well. So that softens the
softens
landing.
the surface. So if something does go slightly wrong, then you're not going to get as many bruises as if you didn't have any bubbles. So.
Right. Wow.
Yeah.
You mentioned sort of the courage and bravery, and that is essentially what you've got when you're standing on the board. Like, if anyone has just stood on a 10-meter platform, it is scary. Yeah. Even just stepping there and jumping off, like, that's scary. Your legs go, your palms are sweating, your heart rate's flying through the roof. How are you managing that? How are you harnessing that nerve, that adrenaline? Especially when you've got to think about what you've got to do. Yeah.
So I think, I was always taught as a junior, everything's about the process. So if you just think about, or if you kind of skip ahead and just are too consumed in like, oh, I'm scared of this, or this is nerve-wracking, or am I ready to do this, then it generally probably won't go very well. So if my coach has told me, all right, you're ready to do this dive, and I go to 10 meter and I focus on like 1 or 2 little cues of my technique that he's wanting me to focus on, then you generally get a little bit distracted from how scared you are and you just go for it. So I've always taken that approach of just focus on the process. And, it's the same. It kind of makes more sense to me now as like an experienced athlete. But when you're young, I think it's helped because you are a little bit more risk taking when you're younger. But then also just, focusing on the technique and how I'm doing this dive and not so much what am I doing, or that's important sort of to get it right.
Does it end up becoming quite playful? Does it become
a little bit? And it's fun because when you are young and you're learning a new dive, the whole pool's watching you. As you said, if you get it wrong or you get it right, people are going to cheer for you because you've just done something pretty spectacular. So it is fun, and that's the thing. That adrenaline rush is something that I've always loved. So I don't often get that anymore because I've been doing the same dives now for lots of years. But when you are back at that early phase, it's one of the best parts of it, I think.
So how do you manage that repetition that you potentially get, or if you're, because there will come a time where something ends up going from being new, exciting, and fun to now I've got to get this right. Now I've got to tweak, tune it, fine tune it, get it completely bang on. Where does that? How do you manage that, and what's the process within that?
Well, to be honest, one of the best parts of this COVID sort of period is that because I did have so much time off, I'm actually in that phase right now of redoing all my dives again for the first time in a long time. And usually, over my career of 15 years, the maximum amount of time off at a time I've had is probably 2 weeks. So the fact that I've had I hadn't done my harder optional dives since the the start of March till about a week ago. So I actually felt that adrenaline again, which I haven't had in a very long time. So yeah, when you do sort of, I wouldn't say perfect skills because I'm always working on things, but when you've been doing the same dives for so long, sometimes that repetition can get pretty draining at training. And, you know, like I said, I often go to the pool and I know what I'm going to be doing. Nothing's really ever new anymore. But that's where I find like my success or my interest in diving now is working on those small things and trying to go that extra step, which it gets quite small when you get towards, you know, where I am in my career. But every day trying to find something that I'm working on or trying to get better. It's not going to be massive changes, but something little, then it's been a good session for me. So yeah, the motivation sometimes is like difficult when it is so monotonous, but usually having competitions to work for, or at the moment just working to get my dives back and feel like myself again. That's sort of been the motivation at the moment.
And you've done synchronized.
Yes.
So that must be another ball game as well, because you're now working as a team.
Yeah.
So how does the teamwork work in diving? How does that function?
Well, my synchro partner is actually based in Brisbane, so we don't train together.
Wow. So not very synced right now.
No, but thankfully when we were matched up, we're very similar divers. So both of us are quite powerful divers and pretty strong, and we jump the same height. So they match you together based on that. And then once you kind of figure out your synchronized timing, and you know, we trained quite a lot together at the start, and then we compete quite a lot together as well. Now, even if we have weeks or months apart, as we've had now, if I went up to Brisbane tomorrow and trained next to Maddie for 3 days, our timing would be back where it's at. So leading into competitions, we do spend a lot of time together, but right now it's just perfecting our own individual dives before we bring them back together.
So you've got it almost like as a template of what you want to do.
Yeah.
And then you got to work on that individually.
Yes.
And then when you come together, how do you... timing, like
yeah, so
like that?
Pretty much in a synchronized pair, there's one person that counts. So I'm the counter in our pair. And
so as you're walking up, you're going up 1, 2.
Yeah, so we stand on the board and I just say ready, go, and then after I say go, we know what to do and everything works itself out. So
Right.
I think it looks harder than it is, but
Yeah, okay.
at the same time, when you're trying to do the big dives and, you know, neither of you can make a mistake because then someone's going to be out of time. But yeah, that's where all the training comes into handy, and you've just got to trust that you're ready.
Cool. Yeah, I think you're probably right. It's probably inside this, everything inside sports as well. Once ago, from outside looks complicated, and no, it's just a real simple trick of just going go.
Yeah, exactly.
What at the moment when you get a new dive, or you've got a dive that you've done before and you potentially get it wrong, and have you ever got anything horrifically wrong, and then how do you recover from when you've got it wrong?
I've got a funny story for you. So a couple of years ago, just before Commonwealth Games, when they were on the Gold Coast, Maddie and I were trying to compete a dive that no other girls were competing in the world yet. So that's a forward 2.5 somersaults with 2 twists, where most girls just generally do 1 twist.
Right.
And, you know, I'd been training it for probably 6 months. Maddie had done it a little bit longer than I had. And a lot of our competitions leading into the Commonwealth Games were at the Gold Coast pool, which is an outdoor facility for diving. We usually train indoors. So dealing with the wind and the blue sky, the blue water, you get pretty disorientated at the start. But then add on top of that, trying to do the hardest dive that we can do, it's pretty nerve-wracking. So in that one of those competitions leading up to the Gold Coast, we did that dive in synchro. I said ready, go. We both got to the end of the board. My knees buckled at the end of the board, and I sort of bounced onto my back on the board and then flopped off the side of the board, and obviously failed the dive. It was horrible. It was embarrassing, but you know, I didn't hurt myself, so it was fine. Kind of, you know, everyone knew what we were trying to do, so those sort of things happen. All good. Anyways, then 15 minutes after the competition finished, I'm getting tagged on Facebook on like, Anabelle, what happened? What is this? And I didn't realize that there was Channel 7 news cameras at the pool because where they were doing some promo for the Com Games. And so now I felt horrible because this fail stack of mine is now on the internet, and no one outside of the diving world would have known what I was trying to do and what I was trying to achieve out of that. And so then I had a bit of a breakdown, but then I had to be reminded that it doesn't matter, like people, whatever, it was a bit of entertainment, and there's going to be a new story tomorrow. But it's pretty challenging when you do something does go wrong, and you feel judgment, or you feel like you're disappointing someone, or if I have a bad competition and I feel like I'm letting down my coach. But at the end of the day, my coach knows, and I know I'm always just trying to do the best that I can, and sometimes it's going to go well, sometimes it's not. So it's definitely, I think, how you come back from those disappointments that's going to define you rather than the disappointment itself.
So it's really interesting. What was your focus when you came back then? So what was there support around you to say, like, look, don't worry, nail it, you're trying to do something you've never done before? Did you get the dive in the end?
I did.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Great.
So it was just, again, I was reminded that this is part of the process. I'm not going to nail this dive that's super hard and scary, and everything pretty much has to go right for that dive to go right. Other dives that I do, that if I'm a little bit back from the end of the board or don't jump as high, like, I can generally figure it out in the air. But this dive, everything has to be perfect. So it was kind of just in the plan, get this stuff out of the way now, and then by the time Commonwealth Games comes around, we'll be ready. So, and that was the case.
Cool. Wow. Yeah, I think that's just even from that mindset, that's something that people, first off, there's that fear of failure from a lot of people before they've even had a go. Like, a lot of people will have that fear of not wanting to step onto the board, whatever, step out onto the field, try something new, because they feel there's no reference point to it as well. No one's done this before, so I can't fall back and go, no, I was actually trying to do that, I was trying to do this. I'm going into the unknown. But then to actually try something, have it not go right, is another type of mindset you have to have as well, because you've got to come back from that failure, and you've got to have that, whether it's your own support network, you've got to have that own element of resilience, which I believe is reflective. I think if you're focusing on the process, then things like this end up not being an issue, because you're not driven by the outcome. You're driven by the step that I've got to get right, then the next step that I've got to get right, and then all of that added up creates the outcome that I want, which in your case is going to be the perfect dive. And it takes away it should take away that fear, that element of, well, I'm worried about the outcome, because that's really where your fear comes from. But getting the outcome right. When you take all of this and you go into games and now you're competing, first off, what's it like? What's it like being at the Olympics? You've got, like I said, Team China that are they're the number ones. How do you go into the games keeping that process, keeping that mindset? Is there routines you do? Is there something that you have built into your training, your life, that gets you in that best place possible?
I mean, I've seen sports psychologists and mindset coaches, and I saw sports psych for the first time, I think, when I was 14. And obviously when you're that young, it's more just like working on breathing techniques and how do I perform well, how do I get ready for competition the best that I can. But I think my first experience at the Olympics in London in 2012, I was 19. I dreamt of going to the Olympics. I was a sports nut. So just being in that environment with all my, Usain Bolt walking around and Roger Federer and all these people that I idolized and looked up to, I was pretty overwhelmed by the occasion, but at the same time excited. And, I just couldn't believe I was there. So I feel like in London, all that work that I'd done with sports psychologists and getting ready to, feel confident to perform at my best, that Olympic Games was like a blur. I did 5 dives in my competition, which was 3-meter synchro as well, with a different partner back then. But I couldn't even tell you what I was feeling or thinking, because it was just all huge. I don't think you can, especially if it's your first games and you're young, like, I don't think you can prepare for that, because you just don't know exactly what it's going to be like. I'd competed at a Commonwealth Games, I'd competed at a World Championships, and this was 5,000 times bigger. And for diving, we don't generally get huge crowds at international events, but at the London Olympics, the whole stadium was full. There's a pretty famous British diver, Tom Daley, who was like the face of the Olympics. So everyone was coming to the diving, and it was amazing. I soaked it all in, and we came 5th, so we did pretty well. We probably were a medal chance, but so were sort of 4 or 5 other teams. But yeah, it kind of, I just forgot all my sort of mental training was a little bit of a blur at that Olympics. But then I think the best thing about that experience was that when I got to Rio 4 years later, and now, it's my second Olympics, I knew what to expect in terms of the environment and how massive it was going to be. But I also knew that I'm here first to do my job, and then let's soak it all in after that. So definitely in Rio, and again, a little bit 4 years older, I'd changed sports psychologist by that time with to someone that I really resonated with and hadn't really found that before with the sports psych. And that's when I put into practice those things and didn't let the environment overtake the work that I'd done or like my focus on my job there. So yeah, it's pretty crazy for me to reflect back and see how different I was in London to where I was in Rio. But I also think it's quite similar for a lot of athletes in those experiences.
You mentioned you changed sports psych or mentor or whichever way you want to look at it. And why did you do that? And how did you then figure out that person wasn't for you? And what were the kind of criteria of the person you were looking for and what you found?
Yeah, so I think, as I said, when I was younger, every time I'd see a sports psych, it was more just like, oh, like, how do you feel before you're doing your diving competition? And how can we make you feel the most confident and how can we deal with your nerves? And which was like all fine. But I think, again, when I was younger, I didn't really buy into sports psych. I didn't think I needed one. I was pretty happy. Like, I didn't really get that nervous when I was younger. Whereas when I got older and I was successful in my junior career, so then you've got expectation that you're going to continue to do well and keep making those national teams. And that's when I sort of was like, well, this isn't working, just worrying about my breathing techniques and whatever. I need someone to actually like get inside my brain and help me condition things just in day-to-day life that's going to build me up to be a resilient human and also care about me outside of the pool, not just worry about me what I'm doing inside the pool. So yeah, the sports psych who I have now, she's been on my team now for quite a few years, but she sort of took my focus out of my results and what I was doing in diving and just said, well, who do you want to be as an athlete? What's your purpose in your sport? How do I, as much as doing well in a diving competition is what I'm working towards, that's not going to define me at the end of the day. What do I have outside of my life? How do I deal with my relationships? And then also just bring me back to the process. And I'm training every day to be prepared. So if I wake up on a competition day and I don't feel great, that doesn't equal a bad performance. I can perform well, not feeling great. I can perform well, feeling nervous. So as much as I still use all those techniques like breathing and meditation and visualization and those sort of things, now because I feel like I'm a more well-rounded human in general, which again, I think comes with age, but she's focused on a lot of that stuff that then translates directly into my good performance in diving. So it's been a very big shift for me.
I'll get onto that visualization meditation side of it. And I also know I've seen you do a little bit of yoga as well. So talk about...
I need you to give me some tips.
Yeah. Oh, happily. That whole holistic approach for being an athlete, I think, is so misunderstood when you're young.
Yeah.
Did you find that you were able to, again, when you spoke about having your purpose as an athlete and finding out why you're doing it, who you are as an athlete first, I think that's so, so important. I look back at when I first turned pro, you get wrapped up in the identity of being a cricketer in my case, diver in your case, but you could be a footballer, you could be a rugby player, whatever, and you get wrapped up in that identity, in that bubble. And it's such a fine line because you almost need it sometimes, because you do, if you want to excel and do well and be the best, you have to block out a lot of the external noise and focus solely on something. That's why it makes it excellent, and that's why you're so good at it, is because you're not doing it as a hobby or doing it sort of as a side gig compared to everyone else who might be doing it. That's why you go to the top level. It does, however, become detrimental when you then get towards the end of your career, and like I did when I retired, that you've held on to that identity so much that it comes crashing down.
Yeah.
And it's so important to find that purpose, find that reason why you do it. Did you find a little bit of a change in the way you went about things, who you felt you were as a person? Do you feel more comfortable in it just now that you have that purpose?
Yeah, I think the turning point for me in 2015, the year before the Olympics, we have to qualify Australia spots for the Olympics at the World Championships the year before. So I actually was injured that year and didn't get selected for that team. And that was the first time in 6 years that I hadn't made that major international team. And I put in an injury appeal but wasn't selected. So again, it was kind of the first time that I felt like people didn't think I was good anymore or didn't think I could come back from my injury, didn't have faith in my ability. And I got so wrapped up in like the judgment of other people or what everyone else thought of me, and that I was defined by if I was winning or losing or whatever, that it kind of made me go a bit stir crazy. So that's when I gathered a really close-knit support team who everyone I just felt a good connection with, and there wasn't anyone left in my support team that I didn't feel like fully understood what my plan was or where I wanted to go. And then sort of like, resetting all that and working with this new sports psych and figuring out, well, doesn't matter if I do well or I don't do well, who am I going into that event, or what am I going to be grateful for at the end of the day? If a competition doesn't go well, that's not going to define me. So I think also the last sort of 5 years, especially in Australia, there's been such a large amount of investment in athlete transition, and now we have an athlete wellbeing manager, and that sort of stuff. For me, I feel a connection with that sort of stuff as well, and I like to, I feel I'm the best in my diving career when I'm happy outside the pool and I've got things to distract me outside the pool, and I'm not just fully focused, because I've been there. I moved away from home to focus on diving and didn't really do anything else, and went crazy because if diving wasn't going well, then I was miserable, and I was away from home, so I had no support network around me, and sort of figuring that out now and finding what has worked with me. And then it is also kind of hard now when you see other kids who are 17, 18, 19, and you see them struggling, and like, I just want to rip their heads open and get inside their brain and think, just tell them that don't stress about this stuff. You got to sort of figure yourself out as a whole person and not be defined by diving. But again, a little bit comes with age, but also I take my role now as like a leader in my sport and try and mentor the younger kids to teach them the things that I had to learn the hard way. So
that's awesome. I think you're right. It comes later on in life, but it's something that with my athletes, I'm really trying to teach them to have an understanding of who they are first before, and they see their sport then as what they do rather than who they are. And that way you don't get known as Lewis the cricketer, Annabelle the diver. It's just something that you've done, and it's a part of you, so that yes, you can, when you come out of the gym, whenever you come out of the pool, whenever you come off the field, you can just put that aside and go, what am I focusing on? Have you had any things that you've worked on outside of diving? I found once I sort of started setting out my business, it was really helpful, but I also started to bring in, whether it's another hobby or something else. Have you brought anything in your life that pushes the sport away?
I mean, I studied exercise and sports science, so I had uni for quite a few years, just did it part-time, took me forever, but I sort of had that on the side. But also now for the past sort of 3 years, we used to train every afternoon and then every morning except Wednesday morning, and then have Sundays off. But now I use Wednesday. My coach calls it a me day, but I feel like it's more of like it's a recovery day, but it's also I do things on a Wednesday that I enjoy outside of diving. So that's why when I'm in Melbourne, I love to do aerial yoga. I love that stuff. I love just like going for walks in nature, getting outside, doing something adventurous. So for me, that means I can make it through to Saturday and do Thursday, Friday, Saturday, and they be good quality sessions. Whereas when I was training the whole week, and that's necessary, I think, when you're younger, but because I've had so many years of training underneath me, having that Wednesday to break up my week and get Monday, Tuesday, quality sessions, rest, do my own thing, switch off, enjoy myself on a Wednesday, and then finish off the week strong has been something that's really positively impacted my training. So I definitely have interests outside of diving that also I'm trying to build up for when I retire, and I have things to fall back onto, because that's important to me also. As much as I'm forever going to value my career, and it's always going to be part of my identity, I'm also trying to use my diving career and lead that into other opportunities that I wouldn't have been able to have if I wasn't a diver. So it's a constant work in progress, but I do try and make my life as balanced as possible.
It's great, like using this chapter as a leverage for the next one.
Exactly.
And it's exactly what you should be doing. It's a blessing when I find it frustrating when athletes probably don't recognize that. And it is a subjective thing when you come out of it's a reflective thing. Sorry, when you come out of your sport, you recognize how much value there is in some of the stuff you do. There's so many things I didn't realize that other people would value. You take for granted. Just being able to follow a training program, like something like that.
We do just have so many opportunities these days. Like even over COVID, when we were all in lockdown, the AIS, the Australian Institute of Sport, they put out like finance courses, personal development, all different types of things, like your personal branding, all that kind of stuff. And for me, when I get those emails from our athlete wellbeing and engagement manager, I'm like, sure thing, sign me up, because there's no harm in like giving it the things are like 6-week programs. So if I didn't like the first week, don't go back. But there are a lot of athletes still who don't even read those emails. And I'm like, you just never know like what opportunity is going to present itself out of doing something like that, or doing a virtual workshop where you might meet someone who down the track might work in the field that you want to get into, and there you have a connection. So I try and take those things up whenever I can. And it is frustrating to see other athletes who don't do the same, but then may finish their career or get injured and don't know what to do with themselves. And then you kind of like, you should have taken those opportunities, but everybody's got different interests.
Building your network, even at a semi-professional level. I see guys here. There's opportunities. A lot of even just amateur clubs that got sponsors. And again, with COVID, like it's a really great example of people that have lost their jobs through COVID, but at the same time, it's sprung opportunities in other industries and other areas. So there are businesses out there that are looking for people, trying to find people. And funny enough, I've got a teammate of mine back in the UK who he used to get a lot of stick for the amount of networking events he went to, the amount of sponsors dues he went to. And I was the same. I went to all the sponsors do. I engaged with all the community stuff. I engaged with everyone that was outside of the professional brand that potentially the brand was associated with. I was just building my network, just build it. And he retired a few weeks ago, straight into a job with one of those sponsors that he had ultimately been sort of feeding himself to over the course of years. And then eventually he finishes, people like him, people know him. It's like the longest interview process you're ever going to have, but he's in. He's in straight away.
But also, like, I think sometimes athletes don't realize how many transferable skills that we have. Like, sure, I've never worked a proper job in my life, and I'm 27 years old. So I think, but then I've got people telling me, but everything you've worked for through your career and how you've developed as a person, you may not know how to use the computer program that this business uses or whatever, but you'll learn that in an instant. And then your hard work, your commitment, your whatever will be just as beneficial for that role. So I also try and sort of, but everything I think also is authentic to me. Like, I don't go do things that don't align with who I am, or network with people that I'm not interested in those areas or whatever. So I try and stay authentic to myself, but that's also given me really great opportunities, because I think people can feel that as well. Yeah,
that working with brands or whatever it is, businesses that align with your values as an athlete, it's very important to find those values of who you are as an athlete first, because then it just makes it very clear, I want to work with people like this. Are they environmentally ethical, like whatever it is, but ultimately having your values as an athlete. So I wanted to talk about, like you said, you've spoken about breathing techniques, you've spoken about visualization, meditation. So when you were young, it sounded like you were really introduced to those very, very young. What sort of breathing techniques were they? What was the purpose for them? When did you use them? If you could talk a little bit more about that.
Sure. So I think when I was young, I would just do whatever anyone would tell me. So if someone's like, before you do a dive in training, practice for a competition, take 3 deep breaths, or like take a breath, hold it for 3 seconds, breathe it out and see how you feel. And like, I don't know, again, I didn't really take it seriously back then because I didn't understand the benefits. But as I've gotten older, and I've even had a period of competitions where my sports psych at the time, a different one, sort of spoke through a sort of visualization series that I would then listen to before a competition, and it was pretty much walking me through a perfect dive. So from when I talk to my coach before the dive, and then I'm walking up the stairs waiting behind while other people are still going, and then I walk out, they announce my name, I stand on the board, I do my dive, I hit the water, and it's a good dive. So I actually found that probably one of the most beneficial things that I have done over my career, and I don't necessarily listen to that all the time now, but that visualization process I still go through.
How often would you do that? How often would you potentially?
Well,
when would you do that?
Yeah, so leading into a competition, I try and visualize myself in the facility that competition is going to be in, probably for like 2 weeks beforehand, and then like the night before a competition, the morning of a competition. But I also go off how I feel. So if I am feeling more nervous or like a bit distracted, that's generally when I'll make sure I do it quite often. But at the same time, like, I think I should always be doing it more. And there's some athletes that, visualize their dives every night. But for me, again, I think that'd make me go crazy because it's too much for me. But figuring out what has worked for me has been an interesting process, and just trying different things. And even sometimes, I've gone through periods of 6 months where I've listened to done a 5-minute breathing technique at nighttime or in the morning. Or another thing, like, in diving, the most nervous I get is when I'm standing on the board, everything's silent, they've just announced my name, because at training there's always noise around, there's always distraction. You're never really in that just all eyes on me until you're in that competition. So now my process, like, I behind the boards before I go, I hold my breath and then I breathe it all out and like try and flush out just like the nerves, but I also accept that they're going to be there. And then right before I go, I just say something like, I've got it, or just like some confident to make me believe that it's going to be good. Because again, I've had experience where I'm standing on the board and I think, I'm going to balk, or I'm going to do a bad dive, and I'll do a bad dive because I've just told myself that. So trying to flip that now and just be aggressive and confident is what works for me now.
I'm super interested in, so all of this is to manage your nerves and fears, basically, which is incredible. And I think that's where most people will probably find the benefit within that for them. And if you haven't tried visualization, breathing techniques, then I really recommend giving it a go to anyone that's listening, and especially for harnessing those nerves. And again, you spoke about visualizing that perfect performance, and ultimately it becomes sort of habitual. Like, I probably again now take it for granted that even though I'm playing at a semi-pro level or amateur level, I take for granted what I was doing as a pro, that I'd spent hours of practice doing, and now it's ingrained, it's in there. And you're talking about, well, if I get I'm not almost thinking technically, I'm just in the game, I'm in the flow, it's
like muscle memory. Your body now knows what to do, so you've practiced it.
And you have to rehearse it in your mind. Like, you have to rehearse in your mind. And I think for you, I just can only imagine all eyes are on you at one moment, and you're standing there and harnessing your nerves and that fear is such a powerful thing. And I think breathing techniques and visualization give you that physical thing that you can do. Because you said there about accept your nerves are there. And that was the bit of advice that I had for when I made my T20 debut. So my 2020 debut was on Sky. It was on Sky Sports, on Fox Sports over here. It was live on TV, thousands of people watching. And I was starting the game. I was opening the bowl, and it went horrifically. And I remember that I was just so immersed in everything that was going on outside, externally, and I'd forgotten the process, and I'd forgotten the internal. And that's what visualization, breathing techniques, and practicing that being present allows you to be refocusing on that moment that you're in. And before the game, I'd seen a psychologist and said, do you know what, I'm really nervous about this game. I'm shitting myself. And he said, well, you're going to get nervous, but just accept your nerves. So I was like, okay, that's not bad advice. Like, I will accept them. But then for me was missing the next step. The next step, which was when we're practical.
I've accepted them. What do I do with them now?
Now I've got them. I'm holding on to them. What do I physically do with them? And we as athletes, and do you know what? Not even just athletes, just human beings. We're physical creatures. We almost need a how-to guide in how to put these nerves aside. Yes, I can accept they're there, but now I'm aware of them. Geez, what do I do with them? And how do I physically deal with it? And what you were talking about there is that physical draining of all of that adrenaline, and bringing yourself into a more parasympathetic state to recognize that you're making logical decisions. Otherwise you'll make an emotional one.
And elites, like, so much of elite sport these days is like, at the end of the game when it comes to competition, it's 90% mental. You can have everyone is at the same physical level, same ability,
Great
but
point.
Who's going to do well in that competition is who's stronger up there. So and that's again something that I've learned, is that back in the, I still stand on a diving board at a competition. I'm just as nervous as I was in my first competition 15 years ago. But the difference now is that I don't let those nerves take over or dictate how my performance is going to go. So similar sort of thing. Okay, I can accept my nerves, but that's the work that I've had to do, is that next step of, all right, well, how do I bring my mindset back to focusing on my process and not buying into the jelly legs, or not believing that I can still operate under those circumstances. So it's interesting.
Again, like, it's just bringing that awareness to it. Like, you're going to get jelly legs. Like, accept that they're there, but your next thing is the next step, the step after that. And it is a learned behavior. it's 100% a learned behaviour. It's
and you
training
have to
your
put
mind.
in the work. You do have to practice, because
100%.
same sort of thing. I've tried different things, and you try it once, you're like, oh, that didn't really work. But it's not like I try something a technique in diving once, and if it doesn't work, I just give up. Like, you got to work on it to get better. So it's the same with the mental training, that as much as it's not as enjoyable, because it does take time and you have to focus, but you kind of reap the rewards if you do stick to it.
Yeah. So I think it's just fascinating, and again, like I said, I've never spoken to a professional diver, and that standing on top of a board, I get those jelly legs. I would, God, yeah, just even kind of my palms are sweating just thinking about it. But I just tip my hat to anyone that can do that. You use yoga as well. So do you use yoga from a more physical sense?
Well, kind of. For me, like, yoga always just seemed something different and something fun. Like, as a diver, I'm pretty flexible in my hamstrings, but my back is not flexible. My shoulders, for me, are not flexible. So at the start, when I first tried it out, didn't really know much about it, and I did Bikram yoga at the start.
Oh, wow.
And
yeah.
For me, I found that good, because the warmer I was and the sweatier I was, like, the more mobile my joints then felt. And then, as much as it was very difficult during it, afterwards I'd get that, like, really good endorphin rush. But then for me now, like, why I like the aerial yoga is because I still have that, I loved doing trapeze when I was younger, and, like, just doing fun things. For my birthday, my parents would get me a trapeze voucher or whatever, and I loved the circus and all that kind of stuff. And I'm obviously upside down a lot in my life. So now, like, releasing and, being able to hang upside down and feeling my, like, thoracic, just sort of releasing and getting more extension. And I also find it fun, but it's also challenging, and it's just something different that is not detrimental to my diving training. If anything, it's going to benefit me, and it just enables me to switch off. And I found a studio that loved the people there, so it's more just sort of, I don't know,
community.
Community. And I don't know that much about yoga. I haven't done that much research about it. All I know is that I enjoy it. It makes me feel good. I like, same with meditation. I'm not, like, super dedicated to meditation, but when I feel like I need it, I love sitting quietly with myself and my own thoughts. So it's just kind of like a release for me, I think.
That ultimately is all you need with something like that. And I think it's something it's that release you've got, like you just said, and I don't think it has to be any more than, my world of going into something like yoga, people look at me and go like, oh, well, he doesn't on the spiritualometer of that would be yoga, he's right at the bottom end of that. And I'm going, well, at the end of the day, it's making me a better person. I'm becoming more aware. I'm better in my body. I'm better in my mind. How is what I've achieved, or what my goal is with it, any different from yours? Yours is just probably a little bit more towards the spiritual end, and that just doesn't resonate with me as an athlete. It just doesn't resonate with me in sport, people I work with. So I'm going to go this way and do me, and you go that way and do
I'm on that spectrum too. So
and ultimately that was why I got into it, just for the physical, but it became so much more. And then the understanding and like, you're talking about aerial yoga. I did a class back in the UK, gave it a go, and I have never felt a like hip release than when you get into the oh my God, I've forgotten what they're called, the silks. I've never felt hip release like that before. It was so good. Haven't found one here in Adelaide, actually. Haven't done too much research, to be fair.
I think I googled it last time I was here and couldn't find one, but
there's a lot of equipment that needs setting something like that up. But it's all of these practices are really about getting that time away from your sport, that training of your mind, that training of your body. Look, I realise how long we've been going. I really appreciate your time. Final question. What bit of advice would you give your younger self, very younger self, because you start very early in this, going into what you know now, and going into the world of diving that you've had?
Oh, good question. I think, as corny as it sounds, like, just always having that belief in yourself. Like, as I sort of previously mentioned, there was a bit of a period in my career where I was more externally focused and, like, was more concerned with everyone else judging me or what they thought of me or my performance than just worrying about what I was doing, and being okay with that and being happy with who I was as a person, and not so focused on the things that don't really matter. So as a kid, I was a happy, bubbly person, and just, like, to maintain that through my career and just realize that I'm me, I'm doing the best that I can, doesn't matter what anyone else thinks. and just to back yourself.
Yeah, keep that playfulness, keep that happiness within what you do. Look, thank you so much for doing this.
Thanks
I really
for having
appreciate
me.
it. What a lovely day. I hope you get to enjoy the rest of it. And what have you got planned over the next coming months? What can people expect?
Well, we have some like virtual competitions they're trying to do just online with the other states, and I think Singapore and Malaysia are joining in as well, just to get some competition going, but that's mainly for some of the younger kids who haven't had any competitions this year. But we still have our World Cup that we have to do in, I think it's been postponed to April next year, to qualify those last Olympic spots. So fingers crossed we can get some international comps going next year, but it also might just be a one-shot Olympics by, July, August. So I've just got to wait and see.
Crazy. And where's the best place for people to find you if they're...
So my Instagram's just Anabelle Smith, and then I also have a website that's anabellesmith.net.
Easy. I'll leave the links in the show notes all of that. Thank you again so much for coming on. Really, really appreciate it.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.